Nighttime on Still Waters. This is NB 506812, narrowcasting into the night from somewhere on Britain's waterways. "27th November, Thursday. This morning the kingfisher wakes to a softer, kinder day. The willow leaf finds the current that I cannot see. The air tonight is heavy with damp, and there's a raw, stirring breeze that chills and nips at ears and nose. And the canal surface is ruffled, and the ducks are keeping out of sight. This is the narrowboat Erica, narrowcasting into the darkness of a late November night, to you, wherever you are. Oh, you managed to make it. It's so good to see you. I was hoping you'd come. Come into the warm. The stove is glowing in the corner, so pull up a chair and warm your bones beside it. The kettle is on the boil, the biscuit barrel is on the side, so mind your head when you come down the steps. And welcome aboard. November is tipping into December, and under skies of ash of yesterday's fires, the canal is framed in late autumn's muted colours. Muddy taupe, deep, cavernous greens, faded by wind and sun. A haze of undecided grey. Some dull days the colours pop, but on others they appear bleached and blanched, faded by the celebration of the season's dance, like the coloured plate pictures in aged books that used to belong to Mum when she was a child. But they are colours nonetheless, and I love them. Of course, it only needs a bit of sunshine to transform the day. And then the sparse-leafed spiky hedgerows glow with the deep port of the remaining hips and haws. Ducks clamber out onto the bank and doze on the sun-warmed brick of the culvert, and the glossy ivy leaves shine bright. But days of unpainted skies and a watery light suit me fine too. They somehow seem to meet the mood of this time of year. A gentle withdrawing. As with me at this time, what matters now is what is happening unseen. A time to restore, replenish, attend to the interior, not the exterior. And all along the bankside, our worlds gently close in around us with the gathering darker days. For us all, what is important is what is happening below ground. The trees, the plants, they know this and use the time well, while I'm still trying to fight the cultural torrent and learn it and practice it too. Boots hang heavy with towpath mud. Smoke clouds of old man's beard billow, mingling with the ashy grey of willow herb wisps, hanging in the damp air, like the desultory trails of a cadge cigarette. Gulls rise on a hectoring wind and blade the granite grey cliffs of cloud. Like ducks, the flying skills of gulls are shockingly overlooked. There is something of that skilled, effortless poise of a professional ice dancer about them. From time to time the rooks all lift off a neighbouring field en masse, to the applause of jackdaws' cheers. What is it about jackdaws when I see them with groups of crows or rooks, which is a lot, that makes me immediately think of slightly over-enthusiastic fans and hangers-on who have been granted a backstage pass for the very first time. And even the dimmest of gloomy days lightens up with the spark of a blue pilot light as the kingfisher flits from branch to branch and then fender to fender in front of me. We had our first freeze-over this week. Mercifully for the kingfisher, it lasted only a couple of hours. But it was enough to remind me, although in truth I didn't need reminding, of the vulnerability of this little soul to our weather. I had some lovely comments and feedback from the last episode on Storm Claudia, and as always, it's so great to hear from you. Thank you to Jean Mann. It's wonderful to hear from you again, Jean. And thank you also to Derek Watts on Silver Fox. However, poor Derek and Pauline seemed to spend most of the storm stuck on Network Rail rather than the canals, when a 3.5-hour train journey took 7.5 hours because of delays and cancellations. See, we should have stuck with canals after all. Mind you, let's not mention this summer, huh? And Jason and Karen seem now to be settling into life up there in Scotland. Beautiful photographs, Jason, by the way. And thanks, as always, for the comments. And hello to John McMahon over on YouTube. I love your comment, John. Thank you. And over on Mastodon, hello to our old friend, Shambles. Over on Blue Sky, lovely to hear from Anna McKellar. And I hope, Anna, that your engine bay is okay. Anna also commented about her frustrations with mushroom vents. They're the mushroom-shaped air vents that you can quite often see on the cabin roof of narrowboats, and their ability to let hail and rail bounce through them, and, as she says, drip frozen condensation as it thaws onto the bed below. Why they remain such a feature of narrowboat design, I have no idea. There must be better ways by now. And Anna is right. Condensation forming on the underneath of the brass mushroom and then dripping down is another pain. And so, even when it's dry, they manage to drip. And hello to Tracy Thomas. Thank you, Tracy. There were a couple of leaks, well, drips really, and nothing to be too perturbed about. With that deluge, we were surprised and relieved that there weren't more. I did need to mop up the engine bay, though. And talking of drips and leaks on a boat, another old friend of the podcast, Lee Thomas, got in touch to suggest whether laying down puppy trainer pads might possibly be a solution. And it's funny that Lee should mention that. When we bought the boat, one of the very first things that was recommended that we get was to get a stash of nappies for precisely the task of laying down and soaking up any water. Bilge and other types of pumps are fine for larger quantities of water. However, most times it's that annoying sort of half centimetre or so that's too much for cloths and take an age to mop up with a traditional mop. I suspect that look long enough on most boats on the inland waterways, and possibly on the sea too, I'm convinced you will find a pack of nappies stashed away somewhere. But the problem that we've found with them is that because they're elasticated, they don't lie flat. And there's also not a huge amount of area that actually will absorb fluids. And we've found that incontinence sheets that you put on a bed to be much more efficient, and actually they work out cheaper. They also naturally lie flat, and they also offer the advantage of being able to cut them to size according to requirement. I don't know why I hadn't thought of puppy training pads, though, Lee. It's a great idea, and I'm going to look into it. The main advantage that I can initially see is that on approaching a cash till with a large bundle of packs under my arm, it's more likely to elicit from the person at the till an "ah" rather than the usual "oh," and the avoidance of any eye contact. Lee also wrote to me about a wonderful encounter with her local mule deer she had over Thanksgiving. And I should also add here, a belated happy Thanksgiving if you happen to be listening in America. And up until Lee introduced me to the mule deer, I was woefully ignorant of their existence, and they looked lovely. For newer listeners, Lee lives in a cabin high, well, she calls it in the foothills, but it's high for the UK, high in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. And she wrote, I have had some lovely mule deer observations lately. On a recent afternoon, I was looking out my sliding glass doors and saw a gorgeous buck with some unusual white on his face and a big rack of antlers, trotting along after a doe with clear romance, or at least lust, in his eyes. She was playing coy and trotting along a little way ahead of him. So I watched this little pursuit through what used to be my horse pasture, across the hillside behind my house and into my neighbour's pasture. Then up another hillside into the woods, effortlessly hopping over 4-foot fences as they went. He was so beautiful. I'm sure she was going to stop and bat her eyelashes at him soon. And then, last night, I noticed such a pretty pink sunset going on as I looked through the same glass doors that I sprang up and went outside without even putting on a jacket. I was standing there in the 25-degree Fahrenheit chill, that's almost -4 degrees centigrade, soaking it in, when I heard the sound of little hoofbeats off to my right. I looked and saw one of this spring's fawns, now quite big, following along behind its mother as she trotted by to join about 6 others crossing over into my pasture. Somehow, being able to hear their passing, as well as see them, made it all the more intimate and magical. A true thanksgiving to and from the natural world. That's lovely, Lee. Thanks for sharing it with us. And all that remains for me is to say a very big thank you to all of our Lockwheelers for supporting this podcast. They are Susan Baker, Mind Shambles, Clare Hollingsworth, Kevin B., Fleur and David Mcloughlin, Lois Raphael, Tania Yorgey, Andrea Hansen, Chris Hinds, Chris and Alan on the narrowboat The Land of Green Ginger, Captain Arlo, Rebecca Russell, Allison on the narrowboat Mukka, Derek and Pauline on Silver Fox, Anna V, Orange Cookie, Mary Keane, Tony Rutherford, Arabella Holtzapfel, Rory with MJ and Kayla, the narrowboat Precious Chet, Linda Reynolds Birkins, Richard Noble, Carol Ferguson, Tracy Thomas, Mark and Tricia Stowe, and Madeline Smith. Thank you. We're nearly at the shortest day, and right now in the UK, 2/3 of our day is darkness, and the daily incremental increase is slowing as we near the top of the arc, but it doesn't feel that way. Each day, the daylight still feels a little shorter. Nighttime nibbles at the ragged edges of dawn and dusk, and loiters in the shaded nooks and neglected spaces where branches hang low and rabbits furtively scurry. At these times of the year, night never seems to fully go away. It lurks in the corner of your eye, and is there in the play of light and shadow, flickering across the towpath and city park, and you can feel its breath upon your neck a pace or two behind you. I'm pretty sure I've read this before, but the farmer and poet Tom Hennon expresses it so well in his collection, Darkness Sticks to Everything. Night doesn't fall It rises out of low spots, tree trunks, from the back of the old cow I'm bringing home to milk. And I can understand why it's now, and not later in the true depth of winter, that our ancestors lit the early winter skies with great sparking flames of fire, and why we do still today. More often the sparkle and blaze are generated by electricity and coloured LEDs, but the effect is the same, and the desire is the same too. And despite many years of experience, it all still does have that rather one-way journey feel about it. But the darkness will still keep coming, and the light will never come back. And then I came across a wonderful Substack written by someone that I follow on Blue Sky. I'm meeting so many incredible writers and artists there. And the writer also lives on a narrowboat and shares such a rich, deep connection with the natural world in which she lives. And she writes with her soul, and it's wonderful. Her name's Jen Ratcliffe, and her Substack is called Mess in a Boat. And moreover, she includes a narrated audio version of her articles, which work as a gorgeous podcast, and one which, if you enjoy this one, you're gonna really fall in love with immediately. And I've included the link to it in the program notes below. And her latest article struck such a chord with me. She begins it with, I walk beneath an afternoon of stars, surprised as always that the world turns so quickly, that 3:30 can be filled with the scattering of evening song and the rush of sunset, that darkness holds so many memories of days in my life, as winter, as always, insists upon arriving on time. Just a clutch of days ago, the same hour chimed to me, as early and lazy and round with the embers of day. It always feels like a theft, and I know I'm not the only one. The small talk of the towpath is smattered with shock and awe of predictable nature. There is a relentless beauty in winter, but much like all rebirths, we block out the initial traumatic labour of said birth in order to return as willing victims every year. And I too share that surprise and shock. Each year it comes. Every year I listen to the crow's even song rolling across the fields earlier and earlier. And each year I seem to forget this tidal race of darkness rushing into my day. Each year I'm surprised by the way my body and my mind so tangibly responds to this cycle of gathering darkness and night. And also, I'm beginning to notice my increasing impatience and lack of tolerance with this drive to deny the very reality of life, this demand to try to unbend the circle, to flatten and hammer it straight with our technologies, to convince our bodies and our minds that nothing changes, and to try to fool ourselves by filling the night with artificial light and the winter chill with artificial heat. There are no seasonal cycles, and every day is a t-shirt day, and every day ends when we turn off the light. It's not surprising we feel so lost and so adrift, that we've been tricked into believing that cutting loose our anchors, pulling up our roots, will give us liberty and control over our lives, when actually it's the reverse. And as much as I relish the coming of spring, I also relish the coming of the long nights. and I seem to crave and require them more and more the older I get. To let the horizons of my world draw in for a while. To create a nest. To let the stillness and silence of the night talk to me, restore my balance. To remember that, like the plants and trees I meet every day, at this time of year, what matters most is hidden from sight, underground, root level. To find my place once more, and most of all to be reminded of wonder and awe. This sense of closing in, as Nick Wilson so astutely observes in her column in which she shares her experience about night times in her local woods, is in no sense a diminishing or reducing. It's an opening, a doorway set ajar, to allow us to remember deeper, wider things that we can too often miss in the blaze of daylight and the activities it so often brings. And the appearance of the stars, as Jen notes in our afternoons, even in the bleached wash of the semi-suburban night skies around here, standing on the hill, looking up, waiting for Orion to arise, watching the arcing swing of the Great Bear and the Plough and Cassiopeia has sometimes been genuinely dizzying. That reeling feeling of vertigo, and I am once more reminded that I am living on a tiny blue and green globe spinning in infinity, and that this life that I am living is a miraculous wonder. Our beautiful, chaotic lives, filled with so many fears and lived out in such a frantic turmoil of private despairs and dreams, all of this is nurtured by a small spinning planet that's racing around a star which gives us life, and which in turn is strung on an outer arm of a whirling spiral of galaxy that, if you're lucky, on a clear dark night in the summer, lights a milky star path across your sky. And these are the silent stories of night. But there are more. Just think, since exactly 1 year ago, you have travelled 584 million miles to complete one circle of the sun, all at a speed of 67,000 miles per hour. And all that time, you were also spinning at around 800 miles per hour. But again, it doesn't stop there. For we and our small sun and the collection of planets that we know so well are also hurtling through space at 514,000 miles per hour as part of one of the spiral arms of the Milky Way, and travelling in just 1 year 4.5 billion miles of space. And if we still feel jaded, that same Milky Way is taking us all on a journey toward a group of galaxies called the Great Attractor at a speed of over 1,177,000 miles per hour. That's 1 year you've been having. You and I have travelled so far together. For us, the night tells us very different stories to those our ancestors heard in its silence. But the net result is much the same. A generation of awe, a sense of scale to our lives. Looking up, that capacity to sense beyond the mundane concerns and frustrations, and touch deeper, unspoken truths that can only be felt and never fully spoken. And we live our lives sharing an amazing planet, It's no wonder that we are born to wander, and that its loss fills us with a sense of lostness and dis-ease. Or that so many now fill their hours with the lonely distractions of that forlorn light of glowing screens. Many years ago, I bought a book on astronomy that helped you to navigate your way around the night sky, something I was and am still pretty hopeless at. It was Chet Raymo's An Intimate Look at the Night Sky. And it wasn't what I was really expecting from a book crammed with helpful diagrams and sky atlases. It took my breath away. And rather than the text being full of complex statistics and formulae and abstruse terminology, I was met with writing of breathtaking beauty. All the information was there, but so too was poetry, a sense of contemplation and of wonder and beauty. In fact, at first I wasn't really sure what to do with it. So it stood on my bookshelf besides the Collins and other guides to the sky and celestial charts. But as I grew older, I began to be drawn more and more to the heart of this book. And it's still with me, one of the few that's made it onto the little bookshelf on board the Erika. And I kept my eye and ear open for other books by this scientist and naturalist. And just as we were moving aboard, I came across his The Night of the Soul. It's a collection of his essays on the theme of night. It was a fortuitous find, as this was also the time I began this podcast. And it also, like his book, The Intimate Look at the Night Sky, is a thing of beauty. Finding melody in the language and concepts of astronomy and physics, and lyrically weaving them into the deeper existential themes and questions of the common life. And the essay with which he begins his collection sticks with me the most. Here are some excerpts from it. Chet Raymo, The Silence. Yesterday, on Boston Common, I saw a young man on a skateboard collide with a child. The skateboarder was racing down the promenade and smashed into the child with full force. I saw this happen from a considerable distance. It happened without a sound. It happened in dead silence. The cry of the terrified child as she darted to avoid the skateboard and the scream of the child's mother at the moment of impact were absorbed by the grey wool of the November day. The child's body simply lifted up into the air, and in slow motion, as if in a dream, floated above the promenade, bounced twice like a rubber ball, and lay still. And all of this happened in perfect silence. It was as if I were watching the tragedy through a telescope. It was as if the tragedy were happening on another planet. I have seen stars exploding in space, colossal, planet-shattering, distanced by light years, framed in the cold glass of a telescope, utterly silent. It was like that. And during the time the child was in the air, the spinning earth carried her 1/2 mile to the east, and the motion of the earth about the sun carried her back again 40 miles westward. The drift of the solar system among the stars of the Milky Way bore her silently 20 miles toward the star Vega. The turning pinwheel of the Milky Way galaxy carried her 300 miles in a great circle about the galactic center. And after that huge flight through space, she hit the ground and bounced like a rubber ball. She lifted up into the air and flew across the galaxy and bounced on a pavement. It's a thin membrane that separates us from chaos, The child sent flying by the skateboard bounced in slow motion and lay still. There was a long pause. Pigeons froze against the grey sky. Promenaders turned to stone. Traffic stopped on Beacon Street. The child's body lay inert on the asphalt like a piece of crumpled newspaper. The mother's cry was lost in the space between the stars. How are we to understand the silence of the universe? They say that certain meteorites, upon entering the Earth's atmosphere, disintegrate with noticeable sound. But beyond the Earth's skin of air, the sky is silent. There are no voices in the burning bush of the galaxy. The Milky Way flows across the dark shoals of the summer sky without an audible ripple. Stars blow themselves to smithereens. We hear nothing. Millions of solar systems are sucked into black holes at the centres of the galaxies. They fall like feathers. The universe fattens and swells in a big bang, a fireball of creation exploding from a pinprick of infinite energy, the ultimate firecracker. There is no soundtrack. The membrane is ruptured. The child flies through the air, and the universe is silent. In Catholic churches between Good Friday and Easter Eve, the bells are stilled. Following a 12th century European custom, the place of the bells is taken by instruments de ténébrés, the instruments of darkness. Wooden clackers and other noisemakers that remind the faithful of the terrifying sounds that are presumed to have accompanied the death of Christ. It was unthinkable that a god should die and the heavens remain silent. Lightning crashed about the darkened hill of Calvary. The veil of the temple was loudly rent. The earth quaked and rocks split. The stars boomed on their courses. This din and thunder, according to medieval custom, are evoked by those wooden instruments. But yesterday, on Boston Common, a child flew through the air, and there was no protest from the sky. I listened. I turned the volume of my indignation all the way up, and I heard nothing. The physical silence of the universe is matched by its moral silence. A child flies through the air toward injury, and the galaxies continue to whirl on well-oiled axes. But why should I expect anything else? There are no Elysian fields up there beyond the seventh sphere, where the gods pause in their revels to glance down, aghast at our petty tragedies. What's up there is just one galaxy after another, magnificent in their silent turning, sublime in their huge indifference. The number of galaxies may be infinite. Our indignation is finite. Divide any finite number by infinity, and you get 0. Only a few hundred yards from the busy main street of my New England village, the Quessette Brook meanders through a marsh as apparently remote as any I might wish for. To drift down that stream in November is to enter a primeval silence. The stream is dark and sluggish. It pushes past the willow roots and the thick green leaves of the arrowhead like syrup. The wind hangs dead in the air. The birds have fled south. Trail bikes are stacked away for the winter and snowmobiles are still buried at the backs of garages. For a few weeks in November, the marsh near Quasset Brook is as silent as the space between the stars. How fragile is our hold on silence. As a student, I came across a book by Max Picard called The World of Silence. The book offered an insight that seems more valuable to me now than it did then. Silence, said Picard, is the source from which language springs, and to silence language must constantly return to be recreated. Only in relation to silence does sound have significance. It is for this silence, so treasured by Picard, that I turn to the marsh near Quasset Brook in November. It's for this silence that I turn to the stars, to the ponderous, inaudible turning of galaxies, to the clanging of God's great bell in the vacuum. The silence of the stars is the silence of creation and recreation. It is a silence that which cannot be named. It is a silence to be explored alone. Along the shore of Walden Pond, the owl hooted a question whose answer lay hidden in the interval. The interval was narrow, but infinitely deep, and in that deep hid the soul of the night. I drift in my canoe down Quasset Brook, and I listen, ears alert, like an animal that sniffs a meal or a threat on the wind. I am not sure what it is that I want to hear out of all this silence, out of this palpable absence of sound. A scrawny cry? Perhaps. To use a phrase of the poet Wallace Stevens, a scrawny cry from outside, a chorister whose sea preceded the choir, still far away. Is that too much to hope for? I don't ask for the full ringing of the bell. I don't ask for a clap of thunder that would redden the veil of the temple. A scrawny cry will do. From afar off, there among the willows and the cattails. From far off there, among the galaxies. And the child, sent flying by the young man on the skateboard, bounced on the pavement and lay still. The pigeons froze against the grey sky. Promenaders turned to stone. How long was it that the child's body lay there, like a piece of crumpled newspaper? How long did my heart thrash silently in my chest like the clapper of a bell in a vacuum? Perhaps it was a minute. Perhaps only a fraction of a second. Then the world's old rhythms began again. The crowd gathered. Someone lifted the injured child into his arms and rushed with the mother toward help. Gawkers milled about distractedly and dispersed. The clamour of the city engulfed the common. Traffic moved again on Beacon Street. The night speaks to us with its silences, and we need to hear them. And these days, filled with night, are filled with such promise and such silent stories that call to a hunger deep within. And as Tom Hennon so perceptively writes, at night I dissolve. And what a wild and magnificent and awesome thing to dissolve into. This is the narrowboat Erica, signing off for the night and wishing you a very restful and peaceful night. Good night. Temperature outside 3.9 degrees, inside 20 degrees, humidity 93%, dew point 3 degrees, wind direction west-southwest, wind strength 9 miles per hour, barometric pressure 1001.7, rising, cloud cover 74%, cloud ceiling 10,000 feet, precipitation 4.06 millimeters, moon phase 68% waxing gibbous, day length 8 hours 8 minutes, sunset 15:59, sky casting 7:53.